Welcome, everyone. Just give us a few minutes while everyone comes in. Okay. Welcome to Let's Chat About, the free monthly webinar series hosted by Hope and Focus. We've developed this series with those living with LCA and IRDs in mind, but it is open to anyone who's interested in what's happening in our communities. My name is Courtney Coates, and I'm the Director of Outreach and Development for Hope and Focus. And before we get started, I just want to take a moment to thank our sponsors for this series. They're AGTC, Dominion Energy, Editas Medicine, Janssen, Mira GTX, ProQR Therapeutics, and Spark Therapeutics. We couldn't provide these programs without their support. A few brief housekeeping items. The session will last about 45 minutes. Your microphones have been muted and your cameras are off. You can submit questions through the Q&A function. As time allows, we'll take any questions that come in live towards the end of the talk today. We are recording this session, and after the webinar, we will post the recording to our YouTube channel and send you the link, and it will be on our webpage as well. It's my pleasure today to introduce you today to Ben Yerxa, PhD, co-founder and president of Opus Genetics. Founded in 2021, Opus Genetics is a patient-first, science-driven gene therapy company tackling manufacturing obstacles standing in the way of treatments for ultra-rare blinding conditions. As Chief Executive Officer of the Foundation Fighting Blindness, Dr. Yerxa is responsible for the overall management of the organization, the world's leading private funder of research on potential treatments and cures for inherited retinal degenerative diseases, including age-related macular degeneration. He also serves as the CEO of the Retinal Degeneration Fund, a wholly owned not-for-profit subsidiary focused on making venture philanthropy investments to further the foundation's mission. Dr. Yerxa has more than 25 years experience in biotechnology, drug development, and in translating promising research discoveries into clinical milestones and treatments. Please join me in welcoming Ben. So I will get us, thanks Ben for being here. I'll get us started with our first question. So for someone living with an IRD, can you tell us what Opus Genetics is all about and why they should be interested?
Sure. So Opus really was born out of necessity. We found over the years at the foundation that there were many gene therapies being developed within academia that were just not being developed further. They weren't being picked up by companies for licensing, or they weren't being funded by VCs into spinouts. And so we just got kind of frustrated because we realized that these were developable products, but they tend to be on the smaller size. You know, they're like smaller population size, you know, ultra rare conditions. And so we found that if we took an approach where we would create a business model that would develop multiple assets at the same time, that business model actually was investable. So we took the lead as a foundation to create Opus Genetics. We'll talk more about that, but that was essentially how and why we got going. And a good example is Jean Bennett. She had a couple of assets that she developed since working on Luxturna many years ago that were just kind of sitting in her lab, and they're ready to go. And there's no reason for projects like that to sit idle if the science is ready.
So how does Opus Genetics work with the Foundation Fighting Blindness?
Right. So in the early days, we were, sort of one and the same. So we started the company with the management team from the foundation, for the senior leaders, including myself, to kind of create the company, secure the initial assets, and even catalyze the initial funding by leading the investment. But since the company was founded and sort of launched late summer, early fall, it's now a little bit more of an arm's length relationship. But The foundation's still very, very active. You know, they're have 2 board seats, 2 out of 3 board seats right now are filled by the foundation. And really, as now Opus grows up and hires its own staff, the relationship is a little bit different. It's more like, how do we collaborate with each other? So how can the foundation help Opus and vice versa? So one potential area is natural history studies. So Opus is working on multiple IRDs, and many of these need natural history studies to be part of the development plan. So we can work with the foundation to co-fund natural history studies for the foundation to save money and Opus to save money and just do it collectively. We can work with them in terms of access to the Nmna Tracker registry to help enroll clinical trials, and even just access to the scientific staff for just help and advice.
It's great to see that partnership be so effective. So can you tell us a little bit more about the Opus Genetics business model and what makes it new and patient focused?
Right. So the approach Opus is taking is one in which, you know, we can essentially take on the development of multiple gene therapies regardless of the size of the population. And the way we approach that is, you know, essentially, you know, if we have a stack of these opportunities, the company doesn't rely on any single program being the value driver of the company. It's really the value of the stack of opportunities. So we found that one of the reasons why these weren't being developed is because they were presenting themselves as single programs or maybe 2 programs together, and that just doesn't really work to create a whole company around. You need to have multiple assets. So that's kind of our approach there. And a program that works for us is one that already has in vivo proof of concept, so good data showing that the gene therapy, you know, has efficacy and safety in animals, but is also sort of a normal, straight up the middle AAV gene therapy, gene replacement strategy. So no fancy capsids, no exotic promoters and things, but just the most tried and true straightforward approach as possible is sort of how we want to work at Opus.
So I know you've announced a couple of genes already that you're going to be working on through these methods. Deciding who gets into the pipeline in terms of that, the natural history is so important. So in essence, do you think that that will begin to feed into your pipeline more as more natural histories come out?
Yeah, it does. It does help. So, you know, the first 3 assets in the program coincidentally are all LCAs. That's not necessarily by design. It's just because that's where the science was. You know, Jean's got a very well-funded lab. She contributed 2 assets. Eric Pierce at Harvard contributed the 3rd. So, you know, we're very grateful that they've had good funding to create these therapies in the first place. But there is a lack of natural history data for some of these indications. So we have to augment that as part of our overall development plans. But these are the kinds of programs we're interested in because they've got good in vivo proof of concept data. It's very doable to scale up and manufacture because they're normal capsids that we understand how to scale up. And like I said, for future pipeline assets, if they fit that criteria, like they're ready to be developed and they're normal capsids, we'll consider seriously taking them on. Our goal is to have as many as 5 to 7 programs in our pipeline by the end of this year.
That's impressive. And I think it gives a lot of hope to our audience here at Hope and Focus. So what does the manufacturing process look like for this pipeline?
Right, so we do talk a lot about manufacturing and manufacturing efficiencies. So, you know, sometimes I describe it like this. When we hear about gene therapy companies having problems with their chemistry and manufacturing, many of them are working on much bigger indications where they need a lot more material, like they have a scale up problem. But I remind people and potential investors that for our indications, I mean, for example, 1 vial to treat muscular dystrophy could treat 5,000 retinas. So that's the difference in scale. So when we talk about scaling our manufacturing appropriately, it's actually a scale down problem, not a scale up problem. So it's talking like 50-liter batches, not 500 or 5,000-liter batches, because we need a tiny amount of material for the eye, and it's also a small population. So that's kind of what we're working on, is a strategy for what I call sort of high quality, low volume manufacturing. It's like boutique manufacturing.
I think that that's what sometimes makes it difficult as well. So can you tell us a little bit more about some challenges that you might be facing at Opus Genetics?
Sure. I think, the obvious one is funding. So we have a good start. We have $19 million to start. That's actually seed financing, not even considered to be a full initial round these days. But we'll go through that money pretty quickly with the pipeline we have and some additions to our pipeline. So raising a bigger chunk of money in the next year or so is going to be a challenge. We're actually hoping to raise 70 million or more in the next, 6 to 9 months. That would really fund our portfolio of multiple programs through 2024, 2025, which would be great. Other challenge are things like clinical endpoints. In rare disease, these trials are small. So, the FDA likes to see statistical significance, and it's hard to get these p-values on significance in small trials of 10, 20, or 30 people. So that's a bit of a challenge in terms of clinical endpoints. But we've got some good strategies there. For example, we're really interested in that intersection of objective sort of visual function endpoints with functional vision reported by the subjects. So, Spark and Luxturna, they use that challenge maze, the MLMT. We're looking for next generation approaches to that, even things as crazy as like virtual reality, for example.
Yeah, that's fascinating. We've heard consistently that the clinical endpoints are very difficult for these ultra rare conditions, and trying to show the FDA that even some gain in vision is really important for our community. So you've talked a little bit about your pipeline, your manufacturing process. For someone that's living with LCA or another retinal disease who's looking forward to these treatments, is there something that they could be doing or something for them to consider as you move forward with this?
I guess the main thing would just be to, stay in touch, with your physician, make sure your visits are up to date, because as trials get ready to start, they'll be looking for, subjects who meet certain criteria. So having, those measurements and things up to date, I think is an important piece. And really just, talk to your physician about what's the right strategy. Should you enroll in a clinical trial? At what point do you want to do that? Or do you want to wait till something's approved? All of these are important, considerations you should talk to your doctor about.
That's great advice for those who are anxiously awaiting this. Is there anything else that you'd like to share around Opus Genetics?
Really just that, we're here, we're very mission oriented, and we do say we're sort of patient focused. And I know that a lot of companies say they're patient focused, right? It's kind of a buzzword, but, we're trying to really live that. We're trying to, be close to the community. Since we're kind of coming out of the foundation, we're funded by and for the patients, because we're conceived of and funded by a foundation fighting blindness. So we consider that to be something different about our DNA, in fact, that we really are truly patient focused. And we want to be really transparent with the community over time and give updates on our timelines and things like that. We have nothing to hide. Okay, all the stuff we're working on, there's essentially no competition as far as we're concerned, and we like it that way. And so we intend to be really open and transparent with the community about what we're working on and where we are in development.
That's great. So I assume there will be lots of patient input throughout the clinical trial process. And
that's the idea. Yeah.
Great. So with all that being said, I think that this audience probably has lots of questions. So want to leave some more time for questions than we might normally. We've already got a couple coming in. So someone asked if you could define what normal capsids are.
Yeah, so it'd be things that have been used for a number of years and have been, made in a GMP environment, maybe used in other clinical trials. So we're talking about things like AAV2, AAV8, AAV9, maybe AAV5, things that are sort of in that normal progression of AAV knowledge, as opposed to, newer capsids that were sort of purposefully designed for this or that purpose, like 7M8, or I don't know, there's several others that are sort of newer kids on the block. And that, to us, if we don't need to use a capsid like that, then why should we take the risk on risk?
Yeah, so it's really sticking to that tried and true.
Exactly.
Great. Here's another one. You mentioned 3 genes that are in process now, but you plan to have as many by 5 as the end of the year. Do you have any idea what they might be?
I do. That's an area where I can't really spill the beans, but as soon as it's appropriate for us to make an announcement on what those are, we will let you know. I'll be honest though, we're looking at assets that are not just in academia, but are also within industry that may not be moving ahead as fast as they should. So we're willing to take on assets from both sides of the fence.
Great. So does that mean you might potentially look at developing something that might have a treatment or might be in trial elsewhere that you could see some more science moving forward on?
Yeah. Sometimes companies develop assets up to a certain point and then they change their minds. And if they do that, then we're sort of here to catch those, if that's the case.
Great. We have another question. If you could just talk about the 3 that are currently in process.
Yes, happy to. Yeah, so the first asset is LCA5. So this codes for laborcillin. It's a ciliopathy, severe, early onset LCA. We are actually ready to go into the clinic probably middle of this year. We should be filing the IND right about the middle of the year. And this is coming out of University of Pennsylvania. We'll do the trial at Penn as well. And we're looking forward to getting that started so we can be a clinically staged company. And so yeah, LCA5 is our first program. And then the second one also came from Gene Bennett's lab. It's RDH12. It's another LCA. It's about a year behind. It's an enzyme target. And we just started the manufacturing work for that program with our partner, to be announced soon. And we're excited about that one because we just think it's got a really great chance of success. The third program is Nmna T1. It's kind of a mouthful. This came from Eric Pierce's lab at Harvard, and it's a little bit behind RDH12, maybe 1 or 2 quarters behind. And we are just starting a little bit of early manufacturing work, great animal data coming out of that lab as well. So, basically we're on track to file an 1 to 2 INDs per year for the foreseeable future. And that's part of how we want to grow and build our infrastructure.
Yeah, that's really impressive. Another participant asked, will children be included in the upcoming trials? And if so, what ages?
Right. So generally we start with adults, as you probably know, and we have to do dose escalation to make sure we can get to a safe dose before we go into children. So for LCA5, for example, our current design is a 2 + 2 + 2. It's actually a 6-patient trial. Again, trying to be as efficient as possible. So 2 cohorts of adults of rising doses. And if that high dose is safe in the adults, then the last cohort would be children. And I forget exactly the age range, but it would be, less than 18.
Yeah, pediatric stage, right?
Yeah.
Okay, another one came in. Can you walk us through an expected timeline for any gene to move through the various stages at Opus? What are we talking about beginning to end?
Yeah, great question. So I think as we see it, assuming no major snags in biology and chemistry, right? If it's sort of a normal program. For example, if we are at a point where we can say go, we can make GMP material to be ready for a clinical trial in about 15 months, 15 to 18 months. So, I think that's a good benchmark is if you have a program that's got all the right preclinical work done and you just need to scale it up and get it ready for the clinic, I think about 1.5 years is about what it takes to do it, if you do it well and do it fast. Industry average is probably more like 2 years, but it depends. And we talked earlier about timelines. The way we can shorten timelines is not just making that material, manufacturing it faster, but it's ordering animals early. So for RDH12, believe it or not, we ordered animals for toxicology last August. So that's planning ahead, right?
Yeah.
We ordered them more than 1 year in advance because that's just what you need to do right now, supply chain issues and so on. So we're just trying to be really thoughtful about one, how we scale up the manufacturing, how we do our required toxicology work. And if we plan ahead and order things ahead of time, I think we can shave off, many months on that early timeline. So I don't know if that answers the question, but that's kind of how we're thinking about it.
Yeah. And I think that speaks to what you were discussing earlier with, by having more in the pipeline, it gives you that ability to work on more things and order in advance and know you're going to be doing this kind of work.
Right. So if one program gets delayed, we can use that material for the other one, stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's a great way of looking at things. Those that are in the audience, I'm out of questions here. Please get your questions into the Q&A or the chat, or raise your hand if you'd like an opportunity. Oh, I see a hand up. I'm going to unmute you and you can ask your question.
I just had one question for Ben. Thanks for doing this and talking with us. You said something earlier I just wanted to get clarification on. So the $19 million that has been raised so far, was that to cover just the first 3 genes or for the next through 24? Or were you saying that the 2 potentially additional genes that you were hoping to add by the end of year were also included in that $19 million?
Yeah, they would be included in that. What that does, though, it just shortens our runway. So we'd run out of cash a little bit faster by adding those additional programs. We're okay with that because we know adding more programs adds value to the company and can make it a more attractive investment overall for investors.
Can I ask a follow-up?
Yeah.
So if we regularly participate in vision walks and other opportunities with FFB that we provide donations to, is that the best mechanism for us to have funds be directed to Opus if it's something we're interested in, or is a direct donation something to consider to Opus? How can we ensure our money is going in the places we would like it to go?
Right. So we can talk about this offline, but I think in general, when we think about restricting a gift to something like the RD fund, to Opus, for example, we usually have some cutoff magnitude to sort of make that feasible from a foundation perspective. If we get 2,000 restricted gifts of $50, that gets hard for us to manage. But if you wanted to consolidate and make a gift of, something substantial, then we could talk about how to direct that in a restricted way to the RD fund and Opus.
Great.
Thank you.
You got it.
Along those lines, someone asked if Opus is a for-profit company.
So Opus is a for-profit company. The only interesting thing there is that, it's about half owned by a nonprofit, the RD Fund and Foundation Fighting Blindness. We're actually thinking about the future and maybe converting to a public benefit corporation, which is sort of a tweener in a sense, still a for-profit, but you have a little bit of a different corporate mandate that's not just for the shareholders, but it's also for stakeholders, which would include patients and employees and so on. So we're thinking about that.
Great. And just to Dave's point, donations to Hope and Focus also route through Foundation Fighting Blindness, but are restricted for LCA therapies. So that is another way to get involved in a restricted donation. Another question here. Gene therapy costs approximately $675,000 or more. Do you anticipate Opus products being in that range?
Probably too early to tell. You know, by the time our products launch, we'll kind of look at the market conditions and see what makes sense. Obviously, these are smaller populations and it's still expensive to develop drugs, but I think the main thing is to make sure there's access. So when you look at Luxturna, for example, despite the high price tag, we understand there's been 100% reimbursement. So as long as there's no, restriction to access, if you have a good therapy with good data that demands a high price, then the payer should be happy to cover that.
Thank you. Another question in the chat. We're aware of a viable gene therapy successfully performed on IQCB1 and PHP5 in dogs. Can Opus comment on taking on this gene?
We are aware of that work and we're interested in that asset.
Thank you. I'm not sure if Dave has another question here. I'm gonna let him unmute.
I did not. I'm sorry.
Okay, no problem. I'm just gonna put your hand back down.
Thanks.
Okay. And I think Roseanne had a question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Hi, Ben. It's Roseanne Smiley with Hope and Focus. Just wondering if you can provide any numbers as to when you're going to be seeking participants for clinical trials, or for these 3 projects you're working on, or just how people can figure that out. You mentioned talking to their physician, but I mean, are you recruiting now? And I mean, I guess they can also keep track on clinicaltrials.gov, correct?
Yeah, but and people often cite that as a resource. I think it's a little bit clunky.
Okay.
The best way is to sort of stay in touch with Opus, to be honest with you. So for LCA5, like I said, it's going to be a 6-subject trial. It's going to be done in Philadelphia, 4 adults and 2 kids, basically. So they're likely to be enrolling that trial from their existing database of LCA5 subjects. They're already in their database. That's not going to start until, probably late summer. Once the IND is cleared, it still takes time to get contracts done with the university, unfortunately. So realistically, that probably wouldn't start enrolling until end of summer, something like that. RDH12 would be about a year behind. So maybe a similar size trial to begin with. So, we'll keep pushing out information. If you want to get on our email list, people can go to the Opus website and put your email in there. We'll obviously stay in close contact with you guys at Hope and Focus to make sure the community is fully abreast of what's going on.
Thank you.
You got it.
Great. Are there any other questions?
Dave put his hand up again.
Yeah.
This time for real. Just in line with that last question. So if we've already met with some of the researchers and have records, or our patients, our kids have the records with already, does that come over if you decide to take on the gene?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
So if we, let's just say you take on a gene that affects our children, they've already met with that researcher previously to go, to as part of their process. Do their records, the kids' records, come over to you for reach out and potential inclusion in any trials going forward? Or do we need to just make sure we're in My Retina Tracker or what have you to get, or work with Opus directly to get contacted?
It's sort of all 3, but Opus is not going to take on your medical information. We don't want that. We need to maintain privacy. with your medical information. So as long as it's with your doctor and it's up to date, then I think that's the most important thing. It's also helpful to be in the My Retina Tracker for sure, because we're going to use that as a resource to notify individuals when a trial gets ready to start.
Yeah, that's a great point to get into the registry. Okay, do we have any other questions? Want to make sure everyone has the opportunity to ask questions while we have Ben here today. Okay, here's another. What is the process of transferring a study from a specific researcher to transferring the research to Opus? In other words, how does Opus obtain the rights to continue on the research under its umbrella?
So we work with the inventors of the therapies, and then we have to work with the universities to license the technology. So it's it's a process that we've done many times. So we understand the process. It can take some time, but basically, if the inventors agree that they want Opus to be the home for a certain therapy, then we can usually work it out with the universities in terms of figuring out what the license looks like.
Great. Roseanne again.
Hi, Ben. How does Opus stand as far as, it sounds like this is a pretty unique setup. Are there any, I mean, you have this business model, but are you kind of like a one of a kind model, or are other people doing this, or on different scales, or is Opus just kind of something really stellar and new? And because it seems to be in our world, it seems pretty wonderful. But I was just wondering from your business perspective and where it ranks in the in research advancement.
Yeah, I think it's fair to say that it's pretty unique, but it's not totally out there, right? I think you probably heard of Nmna. Nmna is a great company that's working on similar kinds of assets. They're not as heavily funded by the foundation, and they've got a different kind of pipeline, so it's a little bit different, but they're not totally different in a sense. We just tend to go after and be more willing to go after multiple smaller indications, and that's sort of the main difference, is that we're happy to have 5, 6, 7 programs in development where there's only a few hundred patients in each of those, that are treatable. But if it's a mixture where some are bigger and some are smaller, then it kind of evens out, and that's kind of where the magic is. Some of the things we're looking at are several times bigger than, say, the Luxturna market. Some of the other ones we're looking at are half the size of Luxturna. So, but if we do them all at once, it kind of evens out as a blend.
Okay, great.
Great. Another question from the audience. Does Opus have a protocol for exclusion and inclusion?
No, I mean, every trial is going to have its own unique criteria, and we haven't even finalized those for the first trial yet. So you just have to wait for each trial as they get ready to enroll and see what those are like. But like I said, typically, first couple cohorts are adults, so over 18, and then the last cohort would be, children under 18.
Great.
Maybe I could add maybe one clarifying thing. For gene therapy, it is important that you have some retinal structure that exists so that you can actually have the cells receive the therapy so that it can actually do some good. So if you're much older and you've got severe degeneration, then you may not be a candidate because you don't have the cells left to rescue.
That's a good point. Another question. Opus is looking to raise potentially 70 to 80 million. Is that through one main investor, venture capitalist, a syndicate, or can you talk more about the fundraising strategy? Yeah.
So we kind of kicked off our strategy at the beginning of the year to give us plenty of time. We have cash through the end of first quarter next year. But generally looking for venture capitalists, in a syndicate. To raise $70 million, we need people who can write $10 to $20 million checks. to get the raise done. I can say the foundation has significant reserves earmarked for Opus to backstop it. So yeah, I think it would be, at least 2 to 3 major new investors that can write fairly big checks with existing investors and maybe a few small ones to form a syndicate.
Great. There's been some really good questions today, everyone. Give everyone one more minute to see if anything else comes in. In the meantime, I just want to thank you, Ben, for being here with us today. I think Opus is a great new model, and we're really looking forward to seeing all the work that you guys have to do.
Thank you. Yeah, we're excited about it, and we got to prove it out. We got to do the work and generate some great data. And if we can do that, then I think we do a lot of good for the patients.
Thank you. I'll just remind everyone, next month we will be hosting Ben Shaberman from the Foundation Fighting Blindness, and he's going to be talking more about advancing treatments into clinical trials and the opportunities and challenges surrounding that. So be sure to check on our website. Registration for that should be up tomorrow. And if you haven't signed up for our newsletter, we did a great piece about Opus Genetics when they were first launched. So there's definitely a lot of good news coming from Hope and Focus. Laura has dropped the sign up for the newsletter in the chat. So be sure to check that out with our past editions as well. And we are going to keep the news coming for everyone. Oh, one last question popped in. Will Opus Genetics be showcasing in any of the forthcoming conferences?
Yes, at ARVO, I think we have 2 abstracts that were submitted and accepted. And you froze.
I think Courtney's frozen, so I'm gonna pop in here. But oh, Courtney, you're back. Go ahead.
Yes. I don't know what you last heard, but I was trying to get the last question that just came in, asking if Opus Genetics will be showcasing in any of the forthcoming conferences such as ARVO.
Yeah, I think we managed to get a couple of abstracts in at ARVO, and we're still waiting to hear whether they're posters or presentations.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. We appreciate all your questions today. And as Ben said, stay in touch with Opus Genetics if that is something that you want to follow. And we appreciate all your time today, Ben.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Have a good day, everyone.